When Helen Carson's hands touched the keys of the Millionaire's Porsche, no one expected the broken cleaning lady to silence an entire diner with the roar of that engine. But what she saw under the hood froze her blood. A ghost from her past. A piece of her dead son's legacy stolen by the powerful man who now stood pale with shock before her. For 5 years, she's lived with the crushing guilt that her teenage boy died recklessly in a car crash. But what if it wasn't his fault? What if the truth about her son's death, and the deaths of 6 others, has been buried beneath mountains of money, corruption, and power? Now, with a yellowed note found in a glove compartment and a desperate race against armed men willing to kill to protect their secrets, Helen must risk everything to uncover what her son knew before he died. If you've ever lost someone and wondered if there was more to the story, if you've ever felt powerless against those with money and influence, this tale of a mother's relentless fight for justice will leave you breathless. Follow our channel for more incredible true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and share what you would do in Helen's position. The golden Texas sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Joe's Diner parking lot. Located just off Highway 59 in a town so small it barely registered on state maps, the diner was the beating heart of local activity, the kind of place where everyone from truckers to traveling salesmen stopped for a slice of Marge's famous pecan pie and a cup of coffee strong enough to strip paint. Inside, ceiling fans whirred lazily, doing little to dispel the lingering heat or the smell of grease that had permeated the vinyl booths over decades. The jukebox in the corner played Merle Haggard's Workin' Man Blues, a fitting soundtrack to the blue-collar crowd that filled most tables. Among them moved Helen Carson, invisible as always. At 57, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and a faded blue uniform that had seen better days, she was part of the background, like the flickering neon open sign or the outdated Coca-Cola clock on the wall. Her calloused hands gripped a mop as she worked methodically around customers' feet, cleaning up spilled soda and ketchup without making eye contact. "Watch it there," muttered a trucker as Helen's mop brushed against his boot. She mumbled an apology, keeping her eyes down. 17 years of cleaning at Joe's had taught her the art of disappearing while in plain sight. The dinner rush was in full swing. Waitresses balanced plates of chicken-fried steak and burgers on their forearms, calling out orders to Raul, the fry cook who'd been working the same grill since the Clinton administration. The usual Thursday crowd filled the booths, the Baptist Church Committee in the corner, high school football coach Wilson and his assistants by the window, and the regular assortment of families grabbing dinner before heading home to homework and television. The relative peace was shattered by the distinctive growl of a high-performance engine, the sound slicing through the diner noise like an expensive knife. Every head turned toward the large windows facing the parking lot. A gleaming black Porsche 911 GT3, worth more than what most people in the diner would earn in 5 years, pulled into the spot reserved for the owner, a spot that hadn't been used in months. The late afternoon sun caught the immaculate finish, making the vehicle look like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. "Well, I'll be damned," whispered Coach Wilson. "The prodigal son returns." The man who stepped out of the car seemed designed to match it, expensive, polished, and entirely out of place in Joe's Diner. Richard Vaughn, 43 years old with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted his place in the world for a single moment, pushed open the glass door. His tailored navy suit probably cost more than Helen's monthly rent for her trailer at the Whispering Pines mobile home park. A hush fell over the diner. Richard Vaughn wasn't just any rich guy passing through. He was local royalty, or villain depending on who you asked. Born to one of the oldest oil families in the county, he'd left for New York and multiplied the family fortune tenfold through what small-town rumors described as shrewd business deals and stabbed backs. His company now manufactured high-end automotive parts, with contracts extending to European luxury brands. He only returned to town for the occasional business at the family estate or to check on local investments. Richard's eyes swept across the diner, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth that never quite reached his eyes. He nodded to a few people, ignoring others completely as he made his way to the counter. "Marge, darlin'," he called out to the owner, his Texas drawl somehow both authentic and performative. "How's the best cook in 3 counties?" The older woman's face lit up. "Richard Vaughn, you silver-tongued devil. What brings you back to our little corner of nowhere?" As they chatted, Helen continued mopping, working her way gradually toward the entrance. When she reached the area near Richard's feet, she paused, waiting for him to move. That's when it happened. Helen's gaze drifted momentarily to the parking lot, to the Porsche sitting there like a gleaming black sculpture. For just a second, something flashed across her weathered face. Recognition, pain, and something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or memory. Richard caught the look. His conversation with Marge halted mid-sentence as he turned toward Helen, eyebrows raised in amusement. "See something you like, sweetheart?" His voice carried across the now quieting diner. "Beautiful machine, isn't she?" Helen's eyes immediately dropped back to the floor. "Sorry, sir. Just need to clean this spot." Richard's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth, the kind wealth pays for. No, you were admiring my car. Can't blame you." He leaned against the counter, facing the dining area now, his voice projecting so everyone could hear. "You know what they say about these German sports cars, they're like beautiful women. Expensive to maintain, but worth every penny." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the diner. Something was happening, and the collective instinct of the room could sense it. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Helen more carefully, her worn uniform, her calloused hands, her avoidance of his gaze. "Tell you what," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "I'm feeling generous today." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key fob with the Porsche emblem. Holding it up so it caught the light, he continued, "If you can start my car, it's yours." The diner erupted in laughter. Someone in the back shouted, "She'd have better luck winning the Powerball, Richard." Helen stood frozen, knuckles white around the mop handle. Every eye in the place was on her, no longer invisible, but the center of a cruel joke. Richard dangled the key. "What do you say, cleaning lady? Want to try your luck? I'll give you my Porsche if you can start it." He lowered his voice theatrically, adding, "There's a little trick to it, you see. Not just anyone can do it." More laughter. Someone took out a phone to record the humiliation. Helen's cheeks burned red. But then, something unexpected happened. She carefully leaned her mop against the nearest booth. With deliberate movements, she wiped her hands on her apron and extended one toward Richard. "The key," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her fingers. Richard's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, bigger than before. He dropped the key into her palm with the flourish of a magician completing a trick. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we're about to witness a miracle. Follow me outside." Like a bizarre parade, half the diner emptied into the parking lot. The setting sun cast long shadows as they formed a semicircle around the Porsche. Helen stood by the driver's door, key in hand, face unreadable. "Any time now?" Richard prodded, checking his watch theatrically. "Some of us have important dinner reservations." Helen inserted the key into the door. The crowd held its collective breath, already rehearsing the stories they'd tell about this humiliation for weeks to come. The door unlocked with a soft click. Helen slid into the driver's seat with surprising ease, adjusted it only slightly, and inserted the key into the ignition. Her hands moved to the steering wheel, gripping it at exactly 10 and 2 o'clock. There was something in her posture, a familiarity, a knowledge, that made Richard's smile begin to fade. Helen turned the key. Nothing happened. Richard's smile returned. "As I thought." But Helen wasn't done. Her right hand moved to the center console, flipped a nearly invisible switch, and then pressed a button to the left of the steering column. She pumped the gas pedal twice, then turned the key again. The engine roared to life. Shock rippled through the crowd. Richard's face drained of color. This wasn't possible. That ignition sequence was a special modification, known only to him and the specialist who had customized the car. Helen sat for a moment, letting the engine purr before switching it off. She stepped out of the car and handed the key back to Richard. But instead of moving away, she walked to the front of the vehicle and released the hood latch with practiced ease. As the hood rose, Helen leaned in to examine the engine. The onlookers couldn't see her face, but they all saw when her shoulders stiffened. They all heard the small, choked sound that escaped her throat. When she straightened and closed the hood, tears were streaming down her weathered cheeks. But these weren't tears of humiliation. They carried the unmistakable weight of recognition, of grief. She walked directly up to Richard, who stood frozen in disbelief, and pressed the key into his palm. "Nice car," she said, voice barely audible. "Custom GT3. 2018 model. Titanium valves. Aftermarket ECU." Her eyes locked with his, and for the first time she didn't look away. "Port injection system with the serial number filed off." The color drained from Richard's face. Helen turned and walked back toward the diner, parting the stunned crowd. Just before reaching the door, she paused and looked back at Richard. "I've worked on worse engines," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Much worse." And with that, she disappeared back into the diner, leaving behind a parking lot full of whispers and one very shaken millionaire who stared at his precious car as though seeing a ghost. The whispering spread through Joe's diner like wildfire. Customers leaned across tables, eyes darting toward Helen as she silently resumed mopping, her face once again an emotionless mask. But everything had changed. The invisible woman was now the center of attention, her simple blue uniform suddenly as conspicuous as a ball gown. "Did you see that?" Tracy, the youngest waitress, whispered to Marge behind the counter. "How'd she know that fancy car stuff? She's been cleaning floors here since before I was born." Marge shook her head, gray curls bouncing. "Honey, in all my years running this place, Helen's never said more than good morning and see you tomorrow. People got layers you don't see." Outside, Richard Vaughn remained frozen beside his Porsche, fingers clutching the key fob so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The small crowd that had gathered to witness Helen's humiliation now stood awkwardly, unsure whether to disperse or linger for the next act of this unexpected drama. Coach Wilson cleared his throat. "Well, I'll be damned, Richie. Looks like your cleaning lady knows her way around German engineering." Richard's face twitched as he forced a smile. Beginner's luck. Probably just hit the right combination by accident. His voice carried none of its earlier confidence. "These foreign cars, you know, temperamental as hell." But nobody was buying it. The damage was done. Richard Vaughn, who had returned to his hometown specifically to close a deal on a struggling local factory he planned to strip for parts, had just been publicly undermined by a woman who emptied trash cans for a living. He strode back into the diner, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. The confidence in his walk was forced now, a performance for an audience that had already seen behind the curtain. "Hey," he called to Helen, who was now wiping down an empty booth in the corner. "I don't know what kind of stunt that was, but nobody makes a fool of me in my own hometown." Helen didn't look up. "Wasn't trying to make a fool of anyone, Mr. Vaughn. Just started your car like you asked." Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "How did you know about those modifications? Nobody touches that car but my personal mechanic in Dallas." For the first time, something flickered behind Helen's tired eyes. Not fear, but something sharper. Anger, perhaps. Or determination. "Some things you don't forget," she said quietly. "Like the sound a particular engine makes. Or how it's been modified." She turned away, but Richard grabbed her arm. The diner fell silent again. Even Raoul stopped flipping burgers, spatula suspended in midair. "Who are you?" Richard demanded, no longer bothering to keep his voice down. Helen gently but firmly removed his hand from her arm. "Just a woman who's seen the insides of more engines than you've had hot dinners, Mr. Vaughn." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "I've worked on worse engines. Much worse." With those cryptic words hanging in the air, Helen gathered her cleaning supplies and disappeared into the back room. Richard stood alone in the middle of the diner, aware of every eye watching him, every ear straining to catch what had transpired. He threw a $20 bill on the counter. "Keep the change, Marge," he muttered, then stalked out the door. The rumor mill went into overdrive the moment he left. By closing time, half the town had heard some version of the story. By morning, it would reach the other half. Helen's trailer sat at the far end of Whispering Pines Mobile Home Park, separated from the others by a small patch of wild bluebonnets she'd carefully preserved. The metal exterior, once white, had faded to a dull gray that matched the evening sky as she trudged up the gravel path. Inside, the modest space was immaculate. The same precision she brought to her cleaning job evident in the perfectly arranged cushions and meticulously organized kitchen. Only one area broke the pattern: a small table in the corner cluttered with old photographs, newspaper clippings, and a dusty bronze star medal in a worn display case. Helen sank into her armchair, not bothering to turn on the lights as darkness crept into the trailer. Her encounter with Richard Vaughn had opened wounds she'd spent years trying to cauterize. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She checked the caller ID and sighed before answering. "Hi, Maggie," she said, her voice suddenly weary. "Mom, what the hell?" Her daughter's voice crackled through the speaker. "Jenna Wilson's mom just called me asking if you used to be some kind of mechanic. Said you embarrassed Richard Vaughn in front of the whole town." Helen closed her eyes. "It's complicated, sweetie." "Everything with you is complicated," Maggie snapped. "I thought we agreed you wouldn't bring up the past anymore. It's been 5 years, Mom. We all need to move on." The words stung, but Helen had grown accustomed to her daughter's sharp edges. Since losing her brother, Maggie had built walls that even a mother's love couldn't scale. "It wasn't about that," Helen said softly. "The man was being cruel. I just reacted." A heavy silence filled the line before Maggie spoke again. "Dad called. Said you missed your appointment with Dr. Feldman again." "I'm fine. Don't need a therapist telling me what I already know." "What you know," Maggie's voice cracked slightly, "is how to live in the past. Meanwhile, the rest of us are trying to build a future." The call ended with their usual strained goodbyes, promises to meet for coffee that would likely be broken, and the unspoken weight of all they couldn't say to each other. Alone again, Helen pulled a wooden box from beneath her bed. Inside lay newspaper clippings yellowed with age, official-looking documents with important sections blacked out, and photographs of a smiling teenage boy next to a partially rebuilt engine. Thomas, her son. One particular photo caught the last light of day streaming through the window. Thomas at 16, grinning proudly beside a car he'd helped rebuild, a project car that had become his obsession in the months before the accident. Helen traced his face with a trembling finger. "It was his car, Tommy," she whispered to the empty room. "I'd know that modified port injection anywhere, your design, your work, but how did it end up in his Porsche?" A sudden memory flashed. Thomas excitedly showing her the custom injection system he'd designed for his engineering class, the one that was supposed to revolutionize fuel efficiency, the one that disappeared after the accident. The same system she'd just seen under the hood of Richard Vaughn's Porsche. Helen wiped away a tear and carefully replaced the photo in the box. For 5 years she'd accepted the official story, that Thomas had been reckless, that the crash was his fault. She'd carried that burden of guilt, believing she'd failed to teach her son proper caution. But seeing that engine today had changed everything. That particular modification couldn't have been coincidental. It was too unique, too specific. It was Thomas's design, down to the last detail, which meant someone had lied. And that someone might very well be Richard Vaughn. Outside, the distant rumble of a high-performance engine made her freeze. Through her window, she could see headlights crawling slowly past the entrance to the trailer park. Helen's hand moved to the drawer where she kept an old service pistol from her army days. Then, making a decision, she instead reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Pete? It's Helen Carson," she said when a gruff voice answered. "I need to talk to you about the Thomas Carson case. I think I just found evidence that it wasn't an accident." As she spoke, Helen stared at the old photograph of her son. his eyes bright with promise and dreams that would never be realized. In them, she found the resolve she would need for what was coming. "Why would that car have his design?" she whispered after ending the call. "Why yours of all people, Tommy?" Morning arrived with the harsh glare of Texas summer sun streaming through Helen's thin curtains. She had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and painful memories. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen as she sat at the edge of her bed staring at the Bronze Star medal that had belonged to her late husband. James Carson had taught her everything she knew about engines during their years together in the Army, before an IED in Afghanistan had sent him home in a flag-draped coffin. Now it seemed those skills might finally serve a purpose beyond earning minimum wage at Joe's Diner. The local country radio station hummed in the background as Helen dressed for the day. The morning DJ was already discussing yesterday's incident. And then the cleaning lady just fired up that fancy sports car like she was Dale Earnhardt Jr. Made old Richard Vaughn look like a fool in front of half the county. Folks, I haven't seen anything this entertaining since Pastor Mike got his tie caught in the church photocopier. Helen switched it off with a sharp click. Fame had never been her goal, especially not the kind that came from small-town gossip. She checked her watch, still 2 hours before her shift at the diner. Just enough time. Outside, the morning heat was already building as Helen climbed into her ancient Ford pickup. The engine coughed twice before reluctantly coming to life. "I know, old girl," she murmured, patting the dashboard. "We've both seen better days." 15 minutes later, she pulled into the gravel lot of Carson's Auto Repair. No relation to her, despite sharing the name. The weathered sign had faded from years of sun exposure, and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. But Helen knew this place was her best hope. Mike Carson, again, no relation, had been Thomas's mentor and the only mechanic in town who'd recognized her son's talent with engines. The bell above the door jangled as Helen entered. The familiar smell of motor oil, rubber, and the faint tang of metal shavings filled her nostrils, scents that transported her back to happier times, working alongside James and later teaching young Thomas the family trade. Mike emerged from beneath a lifted Chevy truck, wiping his hands on a rag that had long ago surrendered to permanent grime. His face registered surprise, then concern as he recognized his visitor. "Helen? Lord Almighty, is that really you?" He squinted through grease-smudged glasses. "Haven't seen you in here since..." His voice trailed off, unable to complete the painful sentence. "Since Thomas," Helen finished for him. Her throat tightened around the name. "I know, Mike, it's been a while." Mike gestured toward a cluttered office in the back. "Come on back. Carla just made a fresh pot." His wife Carla had been one of the few people who hadn't abandoned Helen after the accident, occasionally dropping off casseroles even when Helen wouldn't answer the door. In the cramped office, surrounded by invoices and car manuals, Helen explained what she'd seen under the hood of Richard Vaughn's Porsche. Mike listened silently, his weathered face growing increasingly troubled. "You're sure it was Tommy's design?" he asked when she finished. "The port injection system with the modified fuel distributor?" Helen nodded firmly. "I'd recognize it anywhere. Thomas showed me every step when he was building it for that engineering competition. He was so proud." Her voice wavered slightly. "Said it would improve fuel efficiency by 15% while reducing emissions. Called it his legacy." Mike removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully on his shirt. "Thing is, Helen, that design disappeared after the accident. Police collected all his papers and projects as evidence, said they needed to rule out mechanical failure. And they ruled it was driver error instead," Helen said bitterly. "Claimed my son was racing on back roads and lost control." Her hands clenched into fists. "I never believed it. Thomas respected cars too much to be reckless." Mike leaned forward, lowering his voice though they were alone. "There's something you should know. After the accident, I got a call from someone at Vaughn Industries. They wanted information about Thomas's projects, specifically that injection system. Said they were considering a posthumous scholarship in his name. And I told them to go to hell." Mike's eyes hardened. Something felt wrong about it. Too eager, too specific in what they wanted to know. Then 2 days later, someone broke in here. He gestured around the cluttered office. Nothing valuable taken, just some of Thomas's design notes I'd kept. Helen's breath caught. Why didn't you tell me this before? Mike's expression clouded with guilt. You were barely functioning, Helen. Maggie had just left for college, refusing to talk to you. I didn't want to add conspiracy theories to your grief. Helen stood and paced the small room. So Richard Vaughn's company was interested in my son's design, and now that exact design is in his custom Porsche. She turned to face Mike. I need to see the accident report again. Mike hesitated before reaching into a filing cabinet. I kept a copy, never showed you because, well, the photos aren't something a mother should have to see. The manila folder he handed her was worn at the edges, as if opened many times. Inside were police reports, witness statements, and clinical photographs of a mangled sports car wrapped around a tree. Helen forced herself to look at each image, searching for details she might have missed in her grief-stricken haze 5 years ago. There, on the third page of the report, something caught her eye. A close-up of the destroyed engine, with a note from the investigating officer. Custom fuel injection system appears to have catastrophically failed, resulting in sudden acceleration. Helen's hands trembled. They knew. The report says his system failed, but then they ruled it was his driving. She looked up at Mike, her eyes blazing. Someone buried this finding, why? Mike took the report back, studying it with a mechanic's trained eye. This doesn't make sense. Tommy's design was solid. I reviewed it myself. If it failed, it would have been from tampering, not poor engineering. He flipped through more pages, stopping suddenly at a photo of the engine debris. Wait a minute. He pointed to a barely visible serial number on a twisted piece of metal. That's not from any standard part. Mike reached for a magnifying glass, studying the image more closely. Helen, this matches the series of prototype parts that Vaughn Industries was manufacturing 5 years ago. The implications hit Helen like a physical blow. She sank back into her chair, mind racing. Are you saying Vaughn's company made the part that failed in Thomas's car? It sure looks that way. Mike's face had gone pale. And if that part was defective, and they knew it, they'd be legally liable, Helen finished, for Thomas and God knows how many other accidents. Mike pulled out one more document from the folder, a list of similar accidents from the same time period. There were 6 others within a month of Thomas's crash, all ruled as driver error, all with modified engines. He met Helen's gaze, his expression grave. Helen, that scratch you saw on the engine block of Vaughn's Porsche, could it have been a manufacturing mark? Helen's heart pounded in her chest. Yes, the same kind that would have been on the defective part in Thomas's car. Mike ran a hand over his thinning hair. If you're right, if Vaughn's company covered up defective parts that killed 7 people, including your boy. He didn't finish the sentence. The weight of this revelation seemed to physically press down on Helen's shoulders. For 5 years, she'd carried the burden of believing she'd somehow failed as a mother, that she hadn't taught her son to be careful enough, hadn't protected him somehow. The possibility that his death had been caused by corporate negligence and then deliberately covered up ignited something inside her that had been dormant since James's funeral. Rage. As she stood to leave, Mike caught her arm. Helen, this is dangerous territory. Vaughn has money, lawyers, influence. If he's buried this once, Helen met his concerned gaze with steely determination. I've already lost everything that matters, Mike. What else can they take from me? As she stepped back into the blinding Texas sun, Mike called after her one last time. Helen, that car can't be the same one. They would have destroyed all evidence. She turned back, the morning light illuminating the new resolve in her weathered face. But if it is, Mike continued, his voice dropping, it means someone lied to you for years, and not just Vaughn, someone with authority, someone who helped bury the truth. Helen nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Then it's time to start digging. Helen's mind was spinning as she drove to Joe's diner for her shift. The familiar route, past the Baptist church, around the courthouse square, left at the old cotton mill, now seemed different, as if she were seeing her town through new eyes. 5 years of grief had narrowed her vision to the few feet in front of her, but now the blinders were off. She parked in her usual spot behind the diner, next to the dumpsters. As she reached for her cleaning apron from the passenger seat, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Maggie's name flashed on the screen. Helen took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, sweetie." "Don't sweetie me, Mom." Maggie's voice was tight with anger. "I just got off the phone with Mrs. Wilson. She says you're going around town asking questions about Tommy's accident again, that you were at Mike's garage this morning." Helen closed her eyes. Small towns and their insatiable appetite for gossip. Mrs. Wilson had probably been on the phone before Helen's truck had even left Mike's lot. "It's not what you think," Helen began. "It's exactly what I think." Maggie's voice cracked. "You promised, Mom. You promised after the last time that you would let it go." "The doctors said—" "The doctors were wrong," Helen interrupted, something she rarely did with her daughter. "Something's come up, Maggie. Something important." A bitter laugh came through the phone. "Something always comes up with you. For 5 years it's been conspiracy theories and what-ifs, and refusing to accept what happened. Meanwhile, I had to grow up without a brother and without a mother, because you were too busy chasing ghosts." The accusation stung like a physical blow. Helen's hand tightened around the phone. "Maggie, please, if you would just listen." "No, you listen. I'm getting married in 3 months. I want a mother at my wedding, not a crazy woman who can't let go of the past. So you need to make a choice right now. Either drop this obsession once and for all or don't bother coming to the ceremony." The line went dead before Helen could respond. She sat in stunned silence, tears threatening to spill. Her daughter's wedding. How had she forgotten? The invitation had been sitting on her kitchen counter for weeks, untouched like so many other aspects of her life. Wiping her eyes roughly with the back of her hand, Helen forced herself out of the truck. She couldn't afford to be late, not when her entire life was held together by the thin threads of routine and minimum wage. Inside Joe's diner, the atmosphere shifted noticeably as Helen entered through the back door. Conversations hushed, then resumed with greater intensity. Marge gave her a sympathetic look from behind the counter. "You're quite the celebrity today," Marge said quietly as Helen stored her purse in the staff locker. "Half the town's been in here asking about you and that Porsche business." Helen tied her apron with practiced movements. "People need better hobbies." "Maybe." Marge hesitated. "But Richard Vaughn's been in twice already, asking questions about you. Wanted to know how long you'd worked here, if you had family, that sort of thing." A chill ran down Helen's spine. "What did you tell him?" "As little as possible. Man gives me the creeps. Always has." Marge lowered her voice further. "But he left a business card with a note on the back. Said he wanted to clear the air about yesterday." Helen took the card Marge offered. On the back, written in precise handwriting, "We should discuss what you saw. The Westridge Hotel Bar, 7 p.m. RV." She slipped the card into her pocket without comment and grabbed her cleaning cart. As she began her usual rounds, wiping down the booths in the front section, she noticed a familiar figure seated alone in the corner. Pete Lawson, the retired police officer she'd called last night, was nursing a cup of coffee, his weathered face grim as he watched her approach. Pete had been the lead investigator on Thomas's accident and one of James's closest friends from high school. He'd been kind during the investigation, patient with her questions and gentle with her grief. But as her theories about the accident grew more elaborate, he distanced himself, eventually telling her that she needed professional help, not police resources. "Heard you were looking for me," he said as she cleaned the neighboring table. His voice was pitched low, meant only for her ears. "Didn't expect you to find me so fast." Helen continued wiping the surface, her movements automatic after years of practice. Pete sighed. "Small town, Helen. You start asking questions about old cases, word gets around." He glanced toward the window. especially when those questions involve Richard Vaughn. Helen paused her cleaning, meeting his eyes directly. I saw something, Pete. In Vaughn's car. Thomas's fuel injection design. The exact one. And Mike found evidence that the part that failed in Tommy's car was manufactured by Vaughn Industries. Pete's expression remained carefully neutral, but Helen caught the slight tightening around his eyes. That's quite a leap, Helen. The accident investigation was thorough. You read the report yourself. Parts of it. The parts you showed me. Helen leaned closer. But Mike had a copy of the full report. There was a finding about catastrophic failure in the fuel system that never made it into the official conclusion. Something flickered across Pete's face. Concern, or perhaps fear. Mike Carson should know better than to go passing around confidential police documents. He took a sip of coffee. Look, Helen, we've been down this road before. The case is closed. Has been for 5 years. Tommy was a good kid, but he was driving too fast on a winding road. It was a tragedy, but it was an accident. Helen's hand clenched around her cleaning cloth. Then explain how his custom design ended up in Richard Vaughn's Porsche. I can't explain everything in the world, Helen. Pete's voice hardened slightly. But I do know that grief can make people see connections that aren't there. Before Helen could respond, the door to the diner opened and a young woman walked in. Helen recognized her immediately. Emily Vaughn, Richard's daughter, now in her mid-20s. She had her father's confident stride, but her mother's softer features. She scanned the diner until her eyes landed on Helen, then walked purposefully toward her. Pete stood abruptly. I should go. Think about what I said, Helen. Some doors are better left closed. He dropped a few bills on the table and left without acknowledging Emily, who watched him go with a curious expression. Mrs. Carson? Emily said when they were alone. I'm Emily Vaughn. I was hoping we could talk. Helen's surprise must have shown on her face because Emily gave her a small, sad smile. I know who you are, Helen replied cautiously. But I don't understand why you'd want to talk to me. Emily glanced around the diner, clearly uncomfortable with the curious eyes watching them. Not here, please. It's important. She pressed a small folded paper into Helen's hand. This is my personal number. Call me when you're off work. Before Helen could question her further, Emily turned and left as quickly as she had arrived, the bell above the door jingling in her wake. Helen unfolded the note. Written in delicate script were the words, I know about Thomas. I've been looking for someone like you. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Helen moved through her cleaning routine mechanically, her mind racing with possibilities. Pete's warning, Richard's invitation, Emily's cryptic note, all pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet assemble. As her shift ended, Helen found herself standing in the parking lot, staring at Richard's business card in one hand and Emily's note in the other. The Westridge Hotel was on the opposite side of town from her trailer park, a place she'd never had reason to visit. It catered to business travelers and the occasional tourist passing through on their way to somewhere more interesting. A decision crystallized in her mind. She would meet Richard, hear what he had to say. But first she needed to understand why his daughter had sought her out separately. In her truck, Helen dialed the number Emily had given her. The young woman answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. You called. Thank you. I want to know what you meant about Thomas, Helen said, dispensing with pleasantries. How do you know my son's name? A long pause followed. Because I've been investigating my father's company for 2 years, Emily finally replied. And your son's name is in files that weren't supposed to exist. Helen gripped the steering wheel tightly as she navigated the unfamiliar streets of the wealthier side of town. The setting sun cast long shadows across manicured lawns and imposing homes, a stark contrast to the worn trailers and patchy grass of whispering pines. Emily had directed her to a coffee shop near the community college, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. The coffee bean was half empty when Helen arrived, populated mainly by students hunched over laptops. In the far corner, partially hidden by a large potted plant, sat Emily Vaughn. Without her father's intimidating presence, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Her designer clothes and carefully styled hair couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, or the nervous way she kept glancing toward the door. "Thank you for coming," Emily said, as Helen slid into the seat across from her. She pushed forward a steaming cup. "I ordered for you. Black coffee, right? That's what the waitress at Joe's said you drink." Helen left the cup untouched. "You've been asking about me." Emily nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "For about a week now. Ever since I found the files." "What files?" Helen kept her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Emily reached into an expensive leather bag and withdrew a slim tablet. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced ease before she turned it toward Helen. "These." The screen showed a scanned document, an internal memo from Vaughn Industries dated 5 years ago, just weeks before Thomas's accident. The subject line read, "Project Accelerate, Prototype Testing Concerns." Helen's eyes scanned the text rapidly. Technical language about performance inconsistencies and fuel delivery malfunctions jumped out at her. Then a paragraph near the bottom made her breath catch. "Competitive acquisition of the Carson design remains a priority, but preliminary testing indicates compatibility issues with our current systems. The C35 series parts show catastrophic failure rates of 17% when integrated with this type of modified port injection. Recommend immediate recall of all C35 components and cessation of Project Accelerate until safety parameters can be established." Her hands trembled as she looked up at Emily. They knew. They knew the parts were dangerous. Emily nodded grimly. "And they didn't issue the recall. My father overruled the safety team. There's another memo." She swiped to the next document. "Here. He authorized continued distribution while they refined the testing methodology." His exact words. But Thomas's design, how did they get it? He never sold it to anyone. Helen's mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline. Emily looked down at her untouched latte. "That part I'm not entirely sure about. But there's an expense report for a consulting fee paid to someone with the initials PL around the same time." The initials hit Helen like a physical blow. PL Pete Lawson, the lead investigator on Thomas's accident, her husband's friend. "Pete," she whispered. "He must have given them access to the evidence collected after the crash. That's how they got Tommy's design." Emily nodded. "And then they tried to replicate it. My father's company has been using a version of your son's fuel injection system in their high-end custom parts for years now. It's the cornerstone of their Velocity series, their most profitable product line." Helen's grief, which had been a dull ache for years, suddenly sharpened into something more dangerous. Cold, focused rage. "They stole my dead son's invention, used it to make millions, and they covered up the fact that their defective parts killed him." "Not just him," Emily said quietly, swiping to another document. 7 fatal accidents in 3 months, all involving cars with the C35 components, all ruled as driver error, all closed investigations. Helen stared at the list of names. 7 families who, like her, had been living with guilt and unanswered questions for 5 years. "Why are you showing me this?" Helen finally asked. "He's your father." Emily's face hardened, suddenly looking much older than her years. "Because when I was 16, my mother died in a car accident. Single vehicle crash, no witnesses. The police said she was texting while driving, but she never used her phone in the car. She was religious about it." Her voice trembled slightly. "I found these files while looking for answers about her death. And I discovered that her car had been recently serviced at my father's private garage, where they installed prototype parts for testing." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. "You think your father was responsible for your mother's death too?" Helen asked softly. "I don't know what to think anymore," Emily replied, her composure cracking. "But I know he's been lying. About the parts, about Thomas's design, about everything. And now he suddenly brought that Porsche back from storage, the one he never drives, the one he keeps locked away. right when I've been asking questions about Mom's accident. She looked directly at Helen. I need to know what you saw under the hood. Exactly what you recognized. As Helen described the distinctive features of Thomas's design, Emily's face grew increasingly pale. She pulled up a photo on her tablet, a close-up of an engine component with a distinctive scratch mark. Like this, she asked, showing Helen the screen. Helen's heart nearly stopped. Yes, exactly like that. Where did you get this picture? From my mother's accident report. This part was highlighted as potentially malfunctioning, but the final conclusion ignored it entirely. Emily's hands shook slightly. Mrs. Carson, I think my father is planning to get rid of the Porsche. It's evidence. That's why he's back in town, to eliminate anything that connects these accidents to his company. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled, and both women tensed. Pete Lawson entered, scanning the room before his eyes locked on their table. His expression darkened when he saw the tablet between them. We need to go, Emily whispered urgently, gathering her belongings. Now he's working for my father, has been for years. Helen quickly stood, but it was too late. Pete was already approaching, his hand resting casually near his hip where, Helen knew, he still carried his service weapon out of habit. Ladies, he said, his voice friendly but his eyes hard. Having a nice chat? Just getting some coffee before heading home, Helen replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Long day at work. Pete smiled thinly. I'm sure. Mind if I join you? Actually, we were just leaving, Emily said, clutching her bag tightly. I have a meeting to get to. That's a shame. Pete's gaze flicked to the tablet Emily was trying to slide into her bag. I'd be interested to hear what you two have been discussing so intently, especially since Richard mentioned his daughter seemed to be avoiding him lately. He looked directly at Helen. And you turned down his invitation to meet tonight. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Richard's invitation to the hotel bar had been a setup, a way to isolate her, perhaps pressure her into silence. I was feeling under the weather, Helen said, though I'm sure Mr. Vaughn has plenty of other people willing to have drinks with him. Pete's smile didn't reach his eyes. He specifically wanted to talk to you about what you might have seen yesterday, or what you think you saw. The threat was thinly veiled. Helen thought quickly, aware of Emily's growing tension beside her. The coffee shop was too public for anything to happen, but once they left... You know, I'm feeling better now, Helen said, forcing a smile. Maybe I will take Richard up on that drink. The Westridge Hotel, was it? Relief flickered across Pete's face. Good decision. I'm sure he'll be glad to hear it. I can give you a ride if you'd like. That won't be necessary, Helen replied. I have my truck. Pete nodded, stepping back slightly. Then I won't keep you ladies any longer. Emily, your father was asking about you. Said you weren't answering his calls. I've been busy, Emily replied coolly. Tell him I'll call him tomorrow. Pete's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his friendly facade. Will do. You two have a nice evening. They watched in tense silence as he left the coffee shop, climbing into an unmarked sedan parked directly in front of the window where he could clearly see them. He's waiting for us, Emily whispered. He'll follow us wherever we go. Helen's mind raced. The evidence they needed was in Richard's Porsche, the custom fuel injection system that proved he'd stolen Thomas's design, the same design that had been in the cars involved in all those fatal accidents, including possibly Emily's mother's. The note, Helen said suddenly, remembering. The one in the glove compartment. You said it had your son's initials on it. Emily nodded, her eyes widening with understanding. If my father sees it, he'll destroy it. Helen made a quick decision. Is there a back exit to this place? Emily nodded toward a hallway. Through the bathrooms, it leads to the alley. Here's what we'll do, Helen said, leaning close. You go out the back way, take my truck, keys are in my purse, drive to Mike Carson's auto shop and show him everything you've shown me. He knew Thomas and his designs better than anyone. What about you? Helen's expression hardened with determination. I'm going to the Westridge Hotel. Keep Pete's attention on me while you get away. And then I'm going to get that note from the Porsche. That's too dangerous, Emily protested. My father took everything from me, Helen finished quietly. My son, my peace. 5 years of my life spent blaming myself. It's time someone took something from him. She squeezed Emily's hand. Go. Now. As Emily slipped away toward the bathrooms, Helen gathered her purse and walked confidently toward the front door. She could feel Pete's eyes on her as she stepped onto the sidewalk, the weight of his gaze like a physical presence between her shoulder blades. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. For the first time in 5 years, Helen Carson had purpose again, and a name for the enemy who had destroyed her family. The Westridge Hotel stood like a gleaming monument to prosperity in a town that had seen better days. Its modern glass facade reflected the sunset in shades of amber and gold, a stark contrast to the weathered brick buildings that surrounded it. Helen felt distinctly out of place as she walked through the revolving doors, still wearing her diner uniform and sensible shoes that squeaked slightly against the polished marble floor. The lobby was all sleek lines and muted elegance, with abstract art on the walls and staff dressed in crisp black uniforms. Helen could feel curious eyes following her as she made her way to the bar entrance, marked by a discreet sign reading, The Summit Lounge. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she pushed through the door. Inside, the lighting was dim and intimate, with soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. A few business travelers sat at small tables, laptops open and drinks half-finished beside them. At the far end of the bar, alone in a corner booth, sat Richard Vaughn. He was nursing what appeared to be a scotch, neat, his attention focused on the amber liquid as he swirled it gently. He looked up as Helen approached, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before his businessman's mask slid back into place. Mrs. Carson, I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I, Helen replied honestly, sliding into the booth across from him. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but she held her ground. But it seems we have things to discuss. Richard signaled to the bartender who appeared moments later. Another Macallan 18 and... He looked at Helen questioningly. Club soda with lime, she said. She needed a clear head for what was coming. They sat in tense silence until the drinks arrived. Richard took a slow sip of his scotch before speaking. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. At the diner. Helen watched him carefully, noting the perfect Windsor knot in his silk tie, the way his manicured hands rested comfortably on the table. This was a man accustomed to power, to being obeyed without question. You mean when you publicly humiliated me and then got angry when your plan backfired? Helen's voice was calm, controlled. Richard had the grace to look slightly abashed. Not my finest moment, I admit. I've been under considerable stress lately. Business matters. He leaned forward slightly. But I'm curious, how did you know how to start my car? It has a very specific sequence. Helen maintained eye contact, revealing nothing. I worked on aircraft engines in the Army. After that, car engines aren't very complicated. And what did you see under the hood that upset you so much? Richard's tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. A custom fuel injection system, Helen replied. One I recognized. A muscle twitched in Richard's jaw. That's quite impossible. The system in my Porsche is proprietary, developed by my company's engineers. Was it? Helen took a sip of her club soda. Or was it developed by a 17-year-old boy for an engineering competition? A boy named Thomas Carson. My son. The color drained from Richard's face, but he recovered quickly. Mrs. Carson, grief can play terrible tricks on the mind. I understand you've been through a tremendous loss. Don't. Helen's voice cut like steel. Don't patronize me. Don't pretend you're concerned about my mental state. We both know exactly what I saw in that car. Richard's expression hardened. What exactly are you implying? That your company stole my son's design after his death, that you used it to make millions, and that your defective parts caused the accident that killed him in the first place. Helen's heart hammered in her chest, but her voice remained steady. For a long moment, Richard simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, surprising her, he laughed. It was a hollow sound, devoid of humor. You know, when Pete told me you were still poking around after all these years, I thought he was exaggerating. But here you are, still chasing conspiracy theories. He took another drink, larger this time. Let me explain something to you, Mrs. Carson. Your son was a bright kid with a half-baked idea. Nothing more. What's in my car is the result of millions in R&D and years of refinement by actual engineers with degrees and experience. Any similarity is coincidental at best. And the C-35 components? Helen asked quietly. The ones that had a 17% failure rate? The ones you refused to recall? Richard's hand tightened around his glass. Where did you hear that designation? Helen didn't answer, watching the calculation in his eyes. She could almost see him running through possibilities, trying to determine how much she knew, who might have told her. Emily, he finally said, his voice flat. She's been going through company files, hasn't she? Helen's silence was confirmation enough. Richard drained his glass and signaled for another. My daughter doesn't understand the complexities of business, he said after a moment. Of staying competitive in a cutthroat industry. She sees things in black and white, good and evil. The real world isn't that simple. 7 people died, Richard, Helen said softly, including my son. That seems pretty black and white to me. Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Do you have any idea what a mass recall would have done to my company? The lawsuits, the PR disaster, the stock plummet. Thousands of jobs were at stake. Sometimes, sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. Helen stared at him in disbelief. The greater good? You let people die to protect your profit margins. I made a business decision, Richard said coldly. An unfortunate one, perhaps, but necessary. The bartender arrived with Richard's fresh drink, interrupting the charged moment. As Richard thanked him, Helen noticed movement at the bar entrance. Pete Lawson had arrived, taking a seat where he could watch their table. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small nod. Your watchdog is here, Helen noted as the bartender left. Richard glanced over his shoulder. Pete's an old friend. Looks out for my interests in town. He turned back to her, his expression calculating. He was very helpful after your son's accident. Ensured the investigation reached the appropriate conclusion. The casual admission of corruption hit Helen like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain composed. And what was his price for betraying his badge? For lying to me, his friend's widow? Everyone has a price, Mrs. Carson, Richard replied smoothly. Pete's daughter was about to lose her scholarship due to some indiscretions with prescription medications. I made her problems go away, and he made mine go away. Simple transaction. Helen felt sick. Pete had been at their house for cookouts, had bounced Thomas on his knee as a baby, had helped carry James's coffin. And now? She asked. What's your plan for me? Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. That depends entirely on you. This conversation could end several ways. He lowered his voice again. The simplest solution would be a generous settlement. You sign some confidentiality agreements, I provide financial compensation for your emotional distress. You could leave this town, start fresh somewhere nice. Florida, perhaps. Plenty of sun, no more cleaning floors. You want to buy my silence, Helen said flatly. I prefer to think of it as acknowledging your pain while protecting mutual interests. Richard withdrew a business card from his jacket and slid it across the table. My lawyer's number. He can draw up the paperwork tomorrow. Helen stared at the card but made no move to take it. And if I refuse? Richard's expression darkened. Then things become considerably more unpleasant for everyone involved. He glanced meaningfully toward Pete. Small towns can be dangerous places for people who don't know when to let sleeping dogs lie. Accidents happen. People disappear. The threat hung in the air between them. Helen thought of Emily, hopefully safe with Mike by now, of the evidence on that tablet, of the note still in Richard's Porsche. "Where is your car?" she asked, changing tactics abruptly. Richard blinked, momentarily thrown by the shift. "In the hotel garage." "Why?" "I want to see the injection system again," Helen said. "To be sure." Suspicion crossed Richard's face. "Why would I allow that?" "Because if I'm wrong, if it's truly not my son's design, then I'll take your offer and disappear from your life forever." Helen met his gaze steadily. "But if I'm right, we negotiate different terms." Richard studied her for a long moment, weighing options. Finally, he nodded and stood. "The garage, then. Let's settle this once and for all." He dropped some bills on the table and led the way out of the bar. Pete rose to follow them, but Richard waved him off with a subtle hand gesture. As they crossed the lobby toward the elevator that would take them to the parking garage, Helen felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened next would change everything, one way or another. The elevator doors closed behind them, sealing them in a small space scented with Richard's expensive cologne. As they descended, he broke the silence. "You know what I never understood? Why you people can't just accept fate. Your son died. Tragic, but it happens. Why not move on, like normal people?" Helen turned to face him, 5 years of grief and rage crystallizing into perfect clarity. "Because some of us believe in justice, Richard. Some of us don't measure human lives in dollar amounts." The elevator doors opened to reveal the concrete expanse of the underground garage. Richard led her toward the far corner, where the black Porsche sat gleaming under fluorescent lights. "Well," he said, gesturing toward it, "shall we end this charade?" Helen nodded, her heart pounding as they approached the vehicle. Richard pressed a button on his key fob and the locks clicked open. He moved to open the driver's door, but Helen walked directly to the passenger side. "The glove compartment," she said, reaching for the handle. "There's something I need to see." Richard's face changed instantly, alarm replacing confidence. "Wait." But it was too late. Helen had already wrenched open the door and lunged for the glove compartment. The glove compartment popped open with a mechanical click that echoed through the concrete garage. Time seemed to slow as Helen's fingers closed around a faded, yellowed piece of paper tucked behind the owner's manual. Richard lunged across the car's hood, his expensive suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders, his face contorted with rage. "Don't touch that," he shouted. But Helen had already withdrawn the paper, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. The handwriting was achingly familiar, slightly messy but precise, the letters leaning forward as if rushing to get to the end of each word. Thomas's handwriting. Her son's final message stared back at her from beyond the grave. "If something happens to me, the truth is at the 8th Street workshop. Look under the loose floorboard by the east wall. TC." Helen's vision blurred with tears. Her son had known. Somehow, he had suspected that he was in danger. The knowledge that Thomas had died afraid, aware that someone might be targeting him, hit her like a physical blow. Richard reached through the open passenger window, his fingers clawing at the note. "Give me that, it's private property." Helen stepped back, clutching the paper to her chest. "No, this is evidence, my son's last words." Richard's face contorted with fury and something else, fear. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in. This is bigger than your son, bigger than you can imagine." "What's at the workshop, Richard?" Helen demanded, still backing away. What was Thomas hiding that was worth killing him for? "I never meant—" Richard stopped himself, regaining composure with visible effort. "This is absurd. You're twisting everything." But it was too late. The half-admission hung in the air between them. "You never meant what?" Helen pressed. "Never meant for him to die? Just wanted to steal his invention?" Her voice rose, echoing off the concrete walls. "Or never meant for anyone to find out that you let 7 people die to protect your profits?" Richard's expression hardened. "You know nothing about the pressures of running a company like mine, the decisions I have to make every day." "I know you let my son die," Helen said, her voice breaking. "And then you stole the very thing he created, his legacy." The sound of footsteps drew their attention. Pete appeared from behind a concrete pillar, his hand resting casually near his concealed weapon. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his gaze flickering between them. Richard straightened his jacket. Mrs. Carson was just leaving, with a very generous settlement offer. He turned to Helen. "Weren't you?" Helen clutched the note tighter. "I found it, Pete. Thomas's note. The one you helped them hide after the accident." Pete's face remained impassive, but his eyes darted nervously to Richard, who gave a slight shake of his head. "I don't know what you're talking about, Helen," Pete said, his voice deliberately gentle, as if speaking to someone unstable. "You're upset. Let me drive you home." Helen backed away further. "You were James's friend. You helped carry his coffin. And then you betrayed our son for what? To pay for your daughter's rehab?" A flash of shame crossed Pete's weathered face before it hardened again. "You don't understand the position I was in." "I understand perfectly," Helen replied, her voice suddenly calm with the clarity of revelation. "Everyone has a price. That's what Richard said. He bought your integrity, and you sold my son's justice." Pete stepped closer, hand still hovering near his weapon. "Give me the note, Helen. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Helen felt the cold concrete wall against her back. She was cornered between two men who had orchestrated her son's death and the subsequent cover-up. The weight of the past 5 years, the grief, the confusion, the self-blame, crystallized into a righteous anger that burned away her fear. "Back off, Pete," she warned. "I'm leaving and I'm taking this note with me." Richard exchanged a glance with Pete, a silent communication that made Helen's blood run cold. "I can't let you do that," Pete said, moving his hand to rest openly on his holstered gun. "Too much at stake." The tension was broken by the sudden screech of tires as a vehicle barreled down the garage ramp. Helen's old pickup truck came to a skidding halt between her and the two men. The driver's door flew open. "Get in," Emily shouted, her face pale but determined. Helen didn't hesitate. She darted for the passenger door as Richard shouted and Pete reached for his weapon. By the time Pete had drawn his gun, Helen had slammed the truck door shut, and Emily was already accelerating toward the exit. "Down!" Emily yelled as a shot rang out, the rear window exploding in a shower of glass. Helen ducked as Emily swerved through the garage exit, tires squealing on the concrete ramp. They burst out into the night, the truck's engine roaring as Emily pushed it to speeds it hadn't reached in years. The streets of the town blurred past as Helen clutched the dashboard, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you hit?" Emily asked, her knuckles white on the steering wheel as she took a sharp turn onto a side street. Helen checked herself quickly. "No." "You?" Emily shook her head, her eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. "I think we're clear for now. Pete's too smart to use his gun in public, but they'll be coming after us." As the adrenaline ebbed slightly, Helen turned to Emily in confusion. "What are you doing here? You were supposed to stay with Mike." Emily kept her eyes on the road, navigating the truck through a series of turns designed to throw off any pursuit. "I showed him everything. The documents, the accident reports. He made copies and then insisted I come back for you. Said he didn't trust Vaughn or Pete when cornered." She glanced at Helen. He was right. Helen clutched the yellowed note in her hand. Thomas left a message about evidence hidden at the 8th Street workshop. Emily's eyes widened. "The old automotive building? It's been abandoned for years. My father tried to buy it once, but the city wouldn't sell." "Now we know why," Helen said. "We need to get there before they do." Emily nodded and took another turn, heading toward the industrial section of town. The 8th Street workshop had once been a thriving automotive research facility, part of the town's better days before manufacturing had moved overseas. Now it stood empty, windows boarded up, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. They parked a block away, killing the headlights and sitting in silence for a moment. The street was deserted, most of the surrounding buildings long abandoned. A single streetlight cast weak yellow illumination over cracked asphalt and sprouting weeds. "They'll check here," Emily said quietly. "It won't take long for them to figure out where we're going." Helen looked at her son's note again. The east wall, loose floorboard. She turned to Emily, suddenly struck by the young woman's involvement. "You should go. This isn't your fight." Emily's expression hardened, reminding Helen suddenly of the determined look Thomas would get when faced with a challenging problem. "It became my fight when I found those files, when I realized what my father had done." Her voice caught slightly. "And if my mother's death wasn't an accident either." Helen reached out and squeezed Emily's hand briefly. "Then let's find out the truth. Together." They exited the truck silently and made their way toward the chain-link fence. A section had been cut and bent back, evidence that others had used this abandoned building for shelter or more nefarious purposes over the years. The east entrance was partially blocked by debris, but they managed to squeeze through a gap between a fallen beam and the wall. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of abandonment. Weak moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting strange shadows across equipment left to rust and decay. "East wall," Helen murmured, orienting herself. "This way." As they picked their way through the debris, a metallic sound from deep within the building made them freeze. They weren't alone. Helen and Emily froze, barely breathing as the metallic sound echoed again through the cavernous workshop. Years of dust hung suspended in the weak moonlight, dancing like silver specters through the holes in the dilapidated roof. The skeletal remains of automotive equipment, engine hoists, hydraulic lifts, tool cabinets tipped on their sides, created a maze of shadows and potential hiding places. "Someone's here," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Helen nodded, her eyes scanning the darkness. Her military training, dormant for decades, suddenly surged back. She pointed to a rusted workbench, gesturing for Emily to take cover behind it. The younger woman complied without question, moving with surprising stealth for someone raised in luxury. Helen crouched beside her, listening intently. The sound came again, metal scraping against concrete, from the far corner of the building, near the east wall, where Thomas's note directed them. "They're looking for the same thing we are," Helen breathed. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the floor about 30 feet away. A flashlight. Helen caught a glimpse of a silhouette moving methodically along the east wall, tapping the floorboards with something metallic, a tire iron or crowbar. "Pete?" Emily mouthed, but Helen shook her head. The figure was too bulky, the movements too deliberate. They watched as the figure knelt down. The flashlight beam focused on a specific section of floor. The sound of splintering wood confirmed their worst fears. Someone was prying up the floorboards Thomas had mentioned. "We have to stop them," Helen whispered urgently. "Whatever Thomas hid—" Her words were cut short by the sudden flood of headlights through the broken windows, illuminating the interior of the workshop in harsh, white light. The squeal of tires announced the arrival of at least 2 vehicles. The figure by the east wall looked up sharply, then grabbed something from the floor before darting toward a side exit. "Stop him!" Helen hissed, already moving. She sprinted across the debris-strewn floor, decades falling away as adrenaline propelled her forward. Emily followed close behind, surprisingly agile despite her designer boots. The figure, a man in dark clothing, glanced back, his face momentarily illuminated. Not Pete, not Richard, someone Helen didn't recognize. "Hey," she shouted, abandoning stealth. "Stop!" The man bolted through a rusted door, something clutched in his hand. Helen reached the spot where he'd been kneeling moments before. A section of floorboard had been pried up, revealing a small cavity beneath. Empty. "He got it," she said as Emily joined her. "Whatever Thomas hid." The sound of car doors slamming outside spurred them to action. "There's another exit through the back," Emily said, pointing toward a dark hallway. "Used to lead to the loading docks." They had barely taken 3 steps when the main entrance burst open. Pete Lawson stood silhouetted against the headlights, his service weapon drawn. Behind him loomed Richard Vaughn, his expensive suit incongruous in the derelict building. "Helen!" Pete called out. "It's over. Don't make this worse." Helen pulled Emily down behind an overturned filing cabinet, just as Pete's flashlight beam swept over their position. The beam caught the pried-up floorboard and Pete cursed. "Someone's been here already," he said to Richard, who pushed past him to examine the empty hiding spot. "Find it," Richard hissed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Whatever was there, find it now." Helen could see his face clearly in the headlight glow, rage mingled with fear, his carefully constructed veneer of control completely stripped away. Emily tugged at Helen's arm, pointing toward a partially collapsed section of wall, a gap just wide enough to squeeze through, their chance of escape. But Helen hesitated, her eyes locked on the empty hiding place. So close to answers, only to have them snatched away at the last moment. A movement outside caught her attention, a flash of dark clothing as the unknown man sprinted across the parking lot toward a motorcycle. "There," Helen whispered, pointing. "He's getting away." Pete had seen it too. He ran back outside shouting. A moment later, a gunshot rang out, followed by the roar of a motorcycle engine. "The back way," Emily urged again, while they're distracted. This time Helen followed, ducking through the gap in the wall into what had once been an administrative area. Broken desks and shattered computers created an obstacle course they navigated by feel more than sight. At the end of a short hallway, a metal door hung partially off its hinges, revealing a loading dock beyond. They had almost reached it when a voice called out from behind them. "Stop right there." Helen turned slowly. Richard Vaughn stood at the other end of the hallway, his silhouette backlit by the distant headlights. In his hand was a small pistol, pointed directly at them. "5 years," he said, his voice eerily calm. "5 years I've kept this buried. I'm not about to let it surface now." Helen pushed Emily behind her. "It's over, Richard. Pete missed whoever took Thomas's evidence. It's already gone." Richard's laugh was hollow. "You think I care about some teenager's science project notes? This is about the company, my legacy." "Your legacy is built on death," Helen replied. "My son, those other drivers, your wife." Something dangerous flashed in Richard's eyes. "Careful, Helen." Emily found the files. Helen continued, playing for time. The internal memos, the accident reports, the payoffs. Pete might be able to bury evidence locally, but not forever. Not once the families of the other victims find out. Richard took a step closer, the gun steady in his hand. "No one will find out. This all ends tonight." "You're going to shoot us?" Emily spoke up for the first time, her voice remarkably steady. "Your own daughter?" "You stopped being my daughter when you betrayed the family business," Richard replied coldly. "When you started digging up the past." "Mom always suspected, didn't she?" Emily said. "That's why she was investigating the company records. That's why her car suddenly malfunctioned." The same defective parts, the same cover-up. Richard's face contorted. Margaret was confused, misguided. She didn't understand the sacrifices necessary for success. "You murdered her." Emily's voice broke. "Your own wife." "I never meant for her to die," Richard shouted, his composure finally cracking. "The parts were only supposed to fail under extreme stress, racing conditions. She should have been fine driving normally." The confession hung in the air like a physical presence. Helen felt Emily stiffen beside her. "And the others?" Helen asked quietly. "The 7 others, including my son?" Richard's hand trembled slightly. "Unfortunate casualties in a larger war. Do you have any idea what kind of pressure I was under? The board wanted results. The Germans were eating our lunch on performance metrics. Your son's design was the answer, but we couldn't perfect it in time for the production deadline." "So you used it anyway," Helen said. "Knowing it could fail. Knowing it could kill." Richard's eyes were wild now, his justification spilling out like poison. The statistical risk was acceptable. A 17% failure rate under extreme conditions. Most people don't push their cars to those limits. "My son did," Helen said softly, "because he loved engineering, because he trusted machines built with integrity." A commotion outside broke the terrible moment. Pete's voice called out, "Richard, the motorcycle got away. We need to go." Now. Richard seemed not to hear, his gun still trained on Helen and Emily, his mind visibly racing through options. "It's over," Helen said again. "Put the gun down, Richard. Whatever happens next, killing us won't fix it." For a terrible moment, Helen thought he might shoot anyway. Then suddenly headlights flooded the loading dock behind them, accompanied by the unmistakable wail of police sirens. "Police! Drop your weapon!" An amplified voice commanded from outside. Richard's face went slack with shock. "You called the cops? When?" "I didn't," Helen replied, equally confused. It was Emily who understood first. "Mike," she breathed. "He must have called them after we left. Told them everything." The look of betrayal on Richard's face was almost pitiful. "You've destroyed everything," he whispered. "No, Dad," Emily replied, tears streaming down her face. "You did that yourself." The next moments passed in a blur. Police officers swarmed the building. Richard was disarmed and handcuffed, his expression vacant as he was led to a waiting patrol car. Pete tried to flee but was tackled by 2 officers in the parking lot. As Helen and Emily gave their statements to a serious-looking detective, a commotion at the perimeter caught their attention. Mike Carson pushed through the police line, waving frantically. "Helen! Emily!" he called out, breathless from running. "You need to see this." In his hand was a weathered leather portfolio, its edges curling with age. "The man on the motorcycle," Mike explained. "He brought this to my shop just before the police arrived. Said he was a former employee of Vaughn Industries, that he'd been watching the building for years, waiting for someone to come looking." Helen took the portfolio with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of pages of technical drawings, Thomas's original designs for the fuel injection system. But more importantly, there were photographs. Photos of similar parts that had failed catastrophically. Photos of internal Vaughn Industries tests that had been buried. And a handwritten statement from Thomas, dated just days before his death. "I've discovered that Vaughn Industries has copied my design but implemented it incorrectly. Their version will fail under high RPM conditions. I've contacted their engineering department twice, but they're ignoring my warnings. People could die. I'm gathering all the evidence before going to the authorities." Helen pressed the pages to her chest, tears flowing freely now. Her son hadn't been reckless. He'd been trying to prevent a tragedy, to save lives. As dawn broke over the small Texas town, Helen stood in the parking lot watching as Richard Vaughn, handcuffed and hollow-eyed, was driven away to face justice. Beside her, Emily looked simultaneously broken and relieved. The weight of family secrets finally lifted. "What happens now?" Emily asked softly. Helen looked down at the portfolio containing her son's final work, his true legacy. "Now we make sure everyone knows the truth. All 7 families. Your mother, my son, everyone who was silenced." For the first time in 5 years, Helen felt something like peace beginning to bloom in her heart. Thomas would have justice at last. Sometimes in life we accept the stories we're told, because the truth seems too painful to pursue. For 5 years, Helen lived as a shadow of herself, carrying the weight of blame for a tragedy that wasn't her fault. It took a chance encounter, a cruel millionaire's taunt and a familiar engine design, to ignite the spark of justice that had been smothered by grief. What would you have done in Helen's position? Would you have found the courage to challenge powerful men who thought their money could bury the truth forever? This story reminds us that the most ordinary among us, a cleaning lady with calloused hands and a faded uniform, can possess extraordinary strength when fighting for those they love. Helen didn't have wealth or influence, but she had something more powerful: a mother's unwavering determination to honor her son's memory. In a world where the rich and powerful often escape consequences, sometimes it takes just one person who refuses to stay silent to change everything. What truth in your life deserves to be fought for, no matter the cost? If this story of courage, loss, and redemption touched your heart, please consider supporting our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with someone who needs to hear it. Your comments mean the world to us. Tell us what moved you most about Helen's journey or what other stories of ordinary heroes you'd like to hear. Remember, in a world that often celebrates wealth and status, it's the quiet dignity of people like Helen who truly change the world, one truth at a time.